Okay, I'm delighted to be introducing our next keynote speaker. So we have Florian Thalhofer here with us, who was here at our very first, he gave a keynote at our very first Interactive Documentary Symposium in 2011. He's a stalwart in this field. He comes from Berlin. He's a media artist and a documentary maker, and he works with code, he works with design, and he works with story. So, and he's been, he's created his own software, Korsakow, and today he's going to talk about, not just about Korsakow, but more broadly about how his way of seeing the world has framed the way he's created Korsakow, and how Korsakow itself has helped to sort of shape the way he's seeing the world today. So, Florian.
Wow. Thank you very much for having me here. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to be here again. I am Florian Thalhofer. I live in Berlin. I am an artist, a documentary filmmaker. I invented a software. Apart from that, I have a side job. I usually don't mention it, but because it was hugely important for this talk, I say it. I'm a picture editor in the newsroom of Deutsche Welle television. When I studied design 20 years ago, computers just entered the scene. I learned that I'm not very interested in design, but very much interested in storytelling. I was surrounded by computers, I was fascinated with computers, so it was not a big decision to use computers to narrate. So how does that work? There's a little clip that explains that.
This is a SNU, the smallest narrative unit. Usually a SNU is a video sequence. A SNU has POCs. POCs are points of contact. There are in POCs and out POCs. Through an out POC, a SNU connects to other SNUs by connecting to another SNU's in POC. Many SNUs can connect to a single POC, and every SNU can have many POCs. POCs are created by keywords. An in keyword to create an in POC, and an out keyword to create an out POC. A Korsakow film is a collection of connected SNUs.
First time I enjoyed a record session.
I've been using Korsakow for 18 years now as a tool to make my filmic narrations, as a tool to make sense of the world. This is the way I found myself on Korsakow Island. Korsakow is surrounded by water. I cannot really say how big the island is because I have not been to all of its parts. Maybe the island is a continent, I don't know. I think there are other people living on the island. Sometimes I see lights in the distance. I called the island Korsakow, but maybe the other settlers gave it another name. From Korsakow I can see other islands. Not far away there is Linear Island. I was born on Linear Island. I still have family there. I regularly go there for work. I step into the teleporter and I'm there in an instant. For some reason it is very easy for me to go back and forth between Korsakow Island and Linear Island, but it seems to be very hard for other people. Sometimes I can convince others to step into the teleporter with me, to go to Korsakow, but when we step into it, I find myself on Korsakow, and the other people are most of the time still on the island where we left off. I got used to Korsakow and I find life on Linear Island more and more stressful. It makes me nervous. So years already, I live on Korsakow together with my wife. But when people ask me what Korsakow Island is like, I find it difficult to explain. When people ask me what New York City is like, I can describe it in 10 minutes. I maybe spent a total of 6 months there, so I think I know the city quite well. When people ask me about Sydney, I can describe it in 2 minutes. I have been there a couple of times. When people ask me about Berlin, I struggle. I don't know what to say, what describes Berlin adequately. I have been living there for more than 20 years, and all the answers I can give don't seem to get it right. A story is a rocket. It can transport lots of things. Things like information, knowledge, wisdom, news. Basically, all kinds of things that a human brain can breed. And then this cargo can be shot from one brain into another brain. And the rocket can then be reused by other people, and they can shoot the load further on. The rocket doesn't care about the quality of its content, or in other words, good content does not make a good rocket. But for sure you can say, if the load is too heavy, the rocket won't fly. Film shaped the way we use story. Film was invented a bit more than 120 years ago and became quickly the most attractive and influential format of storytelling. Film production quickly became an industry, and industry loves standards. Standards allow effective production. Film educated the audience in the Hollywood logic. People watch films, and they don't just watch one film, they watch film after film after film. This is an exercise for the brain. And people do this practice over and over again. The logic of stories becomes the norm for people. The, let's call it Hollywood formula, became very effective when building the rockets that are used to deliver content from one brain to another. It is now used by businesses and companies to sell their products. It is now used by the media to deliver news and values. It is now used by politicians to get their message out effectively. And it is also used by people. People use this logic to structure the way they discuss things, come to decisions, and to structure their lives. To build a story, you have to build a construction. When you build a bridge, you have to build a construction, or you could say a bridge is a construction. In that sense, you could also say that a story is a construction. And the story follows principles. Over time, you build up to the climax, which is a 2/3 of the complete time of your story. To build up to the climax, you increase suspense. So this is what the story looks like once it's finished. Just like a bridge once it's finished. But when you build a story, you need an auxiliary construction. Just like the auxiliary construction you need when you build a bridge. The construction you need to build when building the story is quite complex. The red dots are the bits of reality, the things that you can take from the world that fit your story. Well, there might be other important, meaningful things that you have found and you would like to tell them. But if they don't fit your story, you cannot use them. The blue dots. If you would love one particular element and you want to have it in your story, but it doesn't fit the story, you have to kill it. And every documentary maker here in this room knows what I'm talking about. And I might add a comment here. The really weird thing is that it seems that experienced storytellers, and at one point when it comes to narrate our own life, everyone becomes an experienced storyteller. Experienced storytellers don't seem to see the bits that don't fit the story. They don't see them anymore. By using the techniques of story building, we become blind for the things that don't fit the story. Let's have a closer look on how the trick works that is used to increase suspense. You need to increase the suspense level of two neighboring story elements. And the most effective way to achieve that is to use the same trick that is used when you want to increase the suspense level between two neighboring countries. You create conflict. To get good conflict, you need high contrasts. You want to portray things in black and white. Shades of gray are not helpful to create conflict. We just heard stories love conflict, and we just heard conflict loves extremes. That is why stories love extremes. A friend of mine, Ralf Ammer, expressed it in a sketch like this. Story is an instrument that divides the world into good and bad. How things are different on Linear Island and Korsakow. When I enter discussions, people on Linear Island sooner or later try to convince me that time is linear, that there is a past and that there is a future. And right in the middle where the past and the future meets, there's a little tiny spot, and that is the moment we are in. And all the nows of the past line up in a linear order, and that is the right order, the basis of cause and effect. And so it will be in the future. So as a consequence of that, if you carefully analyze the past and if you do your job good, you can foresee the future. Well, I can agree on the moment. But when I look into my head, and this is where I have stored the moments from the past, I don't find a linear order. Well, there are things that have more or less influenced the moment I'm in now. But to organize these moments on a timeline seems not to be helpful. In my head, it looks a little bit more like this. There are all these moments in the past that are important for the now. But there is most of the time no cause and effect logic. More important are the influences of these moments on each other. That set of moments then influences the moment I'm in now. But for every now that I'm in, a different set of moments of the past comes into play. My past changes every moment. And so is the future on Korsakow Island. There are multiple and not indefinite possibilities. The consequence of this thinking is that there is not a right way. And that means that there is no wrong way. I cannot make a wrong decision, which decreases conflict right away. What people on Linear Island find interesting. Mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss described what is now known as normal distribution, die Normalverteilungskurve. I actually think the German word sounds cooler. He looked at reality. He was a mathematician, so he looked at all the things that he could measure. The height of the people in a room, for example. If we would measure the height of all the people in the room, the average would be around 1 meter and 70 centimeters or so. And this would be here. So that's the average. There are many people in the room that are a bit shorter and a bit taller than the average. There are just few people that are outside the norm, and just very few people that are either extremely tall or extremely short. Extremely tall, extremely short. And these are the people in the middle. So this is normal. The border of normal is where the curve is the steepest on both sides. So this side and this side. So this defines normal. There's a mathematical decision for normal, which is cool. You could draw the same curve for weight, you could draw the same curve for hair color, or the carbon footprint that people created when they traveled to this venue. Adrian, you might be on the extreme side. And it also goes when you draw a curve for political views or religious beliefs. But what you do as a storyteller when you build your rocket, based on the construction plan that we discussed earlier, you would have to focus on the very extremes. The shortest person in the room compared with the tallest person in the room. Extremes are exciting in terms of storytelling on Linear Island. On Korsakow Island, this is different. I am interested in normal. Why? Because I am normal. The very most of the time. My life plays in the realm of normal. I do not jump from planes in high altitude dressed in a wingsuit. I never killed another human being. My life is not extreme. So the most I can learn is from the experiences of other people that live in the realm of normal. From them I can learn for my life. I can learn not so much from extremes, maybe except for some extreme exceptions. I might be able to learn from an extreme grower of tomatoes on the balcony because I grow tomatoes on my balcony. But maybe seeing the success of an extreme balcony tomato grower, I would get frustrated and stop growing tomatoes altogether. Maybe it would be better to learn from a relative normal balcony tomato grower who is still in the realm of normal but better than me anyway. That's not how story works. Let's get back to Ralph's sketch. And I would like to combine it with Carl Friedrich Gauss's normal distribution curve. Story is not an instrument that divides the world into good and bad. It is an instrument that doesn't care about normal. And that's a problem. But to keep it simple, I get back to Ralph's sketch. If this is the way stories are told on Linear Island, then this is the way that stories are told on Korsakow Island. On Korsakow Island, the exciting parts of the story lie in the kingdom of the middle. I would like to talk a little bit about the problems on Linear Island. Linear causal thinking is not a problem in itself. I want to point out because I'm often misunderstood on that. Linear causal thinking is a tool, and it can be a very helpful tool for thinking through and understanding certain kinds of problems. But, and I think the reason for this is that we are so well trained in linear causal thinking because we watched so many linear films, we tend to use this tool for all the problems we are confronted with. And the way you cannot open a coconut with a can opener without the imminent danger of harming yourself or others, linear causal thinking is not a great tool for all problems. One of my favorite examples of linear causal thinking is the Second Iraq War and how George W. Bush found the smoking gun, the weapons of mass destruction, that later turned out to not even have existed. And because Bush and his team took this clue and combined it in the most linear way with clues from the past, he was able to predetermine a logical future and started a war to prevent that. It was then called a preventive war. If George W. Bush believed this logic himself or not is hard to say. It doesn't really matter. He used this logic to convince others and convince the world, or at least big parts of the world, to support him. The world is full of errors, and I actually believe that most of the problems that could be solved with linear causal thinking have already been solved. And that we are now confronted with a huge mountain of problems where causal linear thinking is not helpful at all. And just a few days ago I came on another example of linear causal thinking when I heard an interview on the radio with author Tom Wainwright about his new book called Narconomics: How to Run a Drug Cartel. Wainwright describes how in the fight against drugs the main effort in the past was to destroy the roots of the problem. And in this case, really the roots. When you think of cocaine or heroin, at the beginning of the process there are plants that are grown by farmers, usually in faraway regions. Troops and military were sent and are still sent there to destroy these fields. These operations then went on for decades, had disastrous influence not only on the farmers but also on the development of whole countries. And all that had basically no effect. The supply of drugs did not stop at any point. The thought behind going after the plants was very simple. When you can stop the supply of drugs, you can stop the use of drugs. But Tom Wainwright looked at the chain from a different perspective. Coca leaves that are needed to produce cocaine that in the end of the chain will be sold in Los Angeles or New York on the streets for $1 million. In the original market, This raw material costs around $1,000. So if you are really successful with destroying coca fields, you might raise the price by 1,000%. And then it costs $10,000. And that would mean that at the end of the chain, the price of cocaine sold in the US is not $1 million, but $1,009,000. So with an enormous effort and a lot of collateral damage, you have managed to raise the price by 0.1%. Not quite, but almost nothing. The war on drugs started under President Nixon in 1972. So such simple and clear argument, it did take 4 decades to see that. On Linear Island, normal is considered to be boring. So boring has to be avoided by all means. In some areas, and I'm thinking of news and politics, there also grew a belief that normal is too complicated for a general audience, and that the best way to simplify things is to show them in black and white and make them emotional. But increasing the contrast and making things emotional also leads to conflict. It makes things exciting, but it also makes things confusing. To display things in black and white does not make it simple. In fact, it creates a false image of the world. And because this image is not in sync with the real world, it makes things terribly complicated. This explains the current success of a figure in the political scene like Donald Trump. He became successful because people were taught for decades to enjoy extremes, to value conflict more than understanding, and to find black and white scenarios convincing. The predictability, how media reacts to spectacular events, becomes more and more a security risk for our society. It became so easily foreseeable how the attention machinery, and I'm working in the newsroom of a television station, how the attention machinery can be switched on, that even simple-minded folks can use it for their purpose. After kids were educated for many, many years that nothing is more desirable than fame, now they get a button to reach exactly that. If a kid with no future and a big hate on society who is willing to give up everything, maybe even risks to lose his own life, this guy just has to attack a random person and shout out the words terrorists usually shout. If this kid manages to kill someone, this kid will be famous within hours. It was never that easy to reach worldwide attention. Working in the newsroom of DW TV, I noticed that every year there's a popular disease. The whole world has to be alarmed, and it's our job at the television station to do that. Less than 3 months ago, a new terrible disease appeared, Zika. In preparation for this talk, I did a little survey, and I did it last week. One of the main sources where we get our images is Picture Alliance DPA, which is a well-respected picture agency, the German Press Association. I looked up how many images are available for different popular diseases of the last couple of years. Zika, the first image arrived in December last year. When I saw this image, I knew that something big is coming, something that will be with us for the next couple of months. 1,562 photos are available through DPR. Do you remember swine flu? 1,662 photos. SARS, 876 photos. Bird flu, 4,189 photos. Ebola, very spectacular, 8,811 photos. Then I checked malaria. Malaria is not very spectacular. The reason for that is because it has been around for the last centuries. There is not much development. That is what you need in a story, development. In terms of story, malaria is really boring. 2,130 photos. So the numbers of the photos in the archive is an indicator for the attention that a particular disease got. Then I looked at how many deaths each disease caused. That would be then an objective indicator of the importance of this disease. Okay, Zika is a bit different because it doesn't kill. Babies are born with this small skull. So swine flu, 18,500 people were killed. SARS, 812 people killed. Bird flu, 386 killed. Ebola, 4,393 killed. Malaria has killed 408,000 in 2014, in 1 year. I have to say, I found that really shocking when I saw that. This shows how we get blinded by So there's the energy problem, there's climate change, obviously. There is the wealth problem. There is too much useless money around that causes a lot of harm. There's the aging society, the rise of depression, and the problem we have with religion and how we deal with different worldviews. Journalists, filmmakers, writers, somewhere in their education they learn that there are multiple views on reality. That you can write a story from one angle or from another, and that there is no absolute truth. There are always different viewpoints. And when I talk to the journalists who are working in the newsroom of Deutsche Welle, of course, they all know that, in theory. Maybe at university they have made an exercise to write about the same topic from different angles. But very likely they have not made it more than once, if at all. Because it is a lot of work to build a story many times to create different angles. But it is one thing to know something and another thing to experience it repeatedly. And that is what people working with Korsakow experience. It is in the nature of Korsakow to create multiple angles, multiple realities. In Korsakow, it is actually really hard to build a story that tells things from one angle only. Because the format of Korsakow always asks the question, really? Is it really like that? Couldn't it be also different? Thank you very much.